Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Legislative Lens Spotlighting State Laws podcast. In this episode, we're going to be dealing with Senate Bill number 17 out of the Texas legislature, out of the 88th session. We're dealing with the banning of DEI offices on public universities. That is the topic of conversation on this law. So what does this law do, Tim, you might ask? Well, it does is it actually bans the offices of the Department of Inclusion and Equity and Inclusion offices on public university campuses. Okay, so what this does in a broad spectrum here, the bill prohibits all state-funded colleges, universities from establishing or maintaining diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, and bans the hiring or assignment of an employee to perform the duties of a DEI officer or office. Okay. So that means you cannot have the DEI, which it's been a topic of conversation in a lot of political conversations, actually, about the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of DEI conversations. It also prohibits institutions from soliciting DEI statements from job candidates or giving preference to any applicant on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. And it bans any mandatory diversity training being implemented in reference to race, color, ethnicity, gender identity, or sexual orientation. All right. A whole lot of words here. But let's talk about it. A couple things, how it's not impacted. A couple things that are not impacted. Senate Bill 17 does not impact student-led organizations at public universities. It also does not impact non-public universities such as Rice in the state of Texas. And only higher educational institutions fall under the bill. So public high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools cannot be impacted by this rule, by this law. Okay. Took into effect, signed into law on June 17th, and went into effect on January 1st. Also, universities of Houston and some other universities have already implemented changes and shared memos about how said changes will be done. Pretty much, this law is straightforward, as straightforward could be. It voted up on party lines. And I think a lot of the argument here into this law, against said law, is the host of this podcast doesn't want to get into the emotional part of this argument, because I think at its core foundation is that we are all human beings and we all wish to be treated the same with respect, dignity across the world. Doesn't matter where you're from. But at its seriousness here, to have certain things be, I would say, taught to you or at an educated level try to be presented to you, it is pretty worrisome. Okay. It, at its rightfulness of the argument, is the LGBTQ plus community, and I understand their arguments into this law, but this host here doesn't argue against people of whatever they wish to be in their bedroom or who they want to be in relationships with. That's not the core of this argument. What the core of this argument and people in favor of this law is that they want to make sure that it's DEI is at its core. The teachings might mean well, but the way they go about doing so is not appropriate. Okay. And there's some teachings that are taught at the DEI level, and the way the practices of hiring with the DEI level can really get a company into some serious trouble. And what this law does is it removes that barrier and says we're going to hire based on this, and this. Also, to be clear as well, The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board will measure the impact of the law twice a year to see exactly the impact of the law, and they'll begin actually giving their findings here every 6 months. And so it's not a discriminatory law at its core. It's meant that people be treated fairly, I think, universally across the board. Does not, you know, I don't know how else to explain it to a lot of people, but as a host of a podcast, um, it is truly a difficult conversational piece, but at its topic needs to be talked about. And I think overall the law means well at its core message. So there is no legal challenges at this point at the public level universities, and we'll be interested to see how this law impacts the state school systems or school universities. Excuse me, because we probably may see a change in how the enrollment levels are. We might see different things. So I'll be very interested to see how that plays out. Feel free to join me on this conversation as well as many other topics. And let's continue on with this season 1 of Texas. Thank you.